Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I was just brushing up on my knowledge of contemporary art and its influences, while enjoying a nice glass of scotch. Some would like to believe that contemporary art possesses the potential to remain independent from its outside influences, existing purely for art's sake. Artists would like to believe that they operate outside of the existing movements and schools of thought, acting independently and without influences. But I'd like to offer an alternative view. It is important to understand the differences between the standardized dictionary definition of contemporary, belonging or occurring to in the present, and the much more complicated art world definition. This topic is what me and Bill will attempt to unpack. We will attempt to address and demonstrate the fact that contemporary artworks are in constant dialogue with their surrounding social, political, technological, and commercial contexts. It is our intended argument that these conversations between artists and their surrounding contexts are an inescapable inevitability, regardless of the time periods that the works occurred. It is important to understand that the definition of contemporary is a moving target. Works from 100 years ago that were considered contemporary at the time can no longer fall under the same category. Let us delve further by first examining the historical and political contexts that can influence an artwork.
Examples of contemporary art being directly influenced by their surrounding historical and political landscapes can be found heavily within the scope of propaganda art forms. These examples develop this relationship by referencing specific people, places, and agendas. This can occur through the work's intended message, as well as the physical form that the works take. Strive Forward in Wind and Tides is a perfect example of this utilization of an art form to engage in dialogue with the political and historical landscapes of the era. The works created in this time period represented Mao Zedong as a godlike figure among his pupils, with the Chinese population being represented as a happy and physically strengthened people for having followed him. The poster and paintings strongly feature the colour red and often centre on the working class people themselves as a subject of focus. These forms of propaganda that were so prominent in this era both influenced and were influenced by their surrounding contexts.
On the western side of the world, Jasper Johns created the work Three Flags in 1958 as a response to other artists at the time, and also in response to the up-and-coming future that he perceived was approaching the art world. It was less about the artists making works out of themselves and out of their feelings, and it was more about looking at the work itself. Three Flags pops out at you in 3 dimensions. He uses 3 separate canvases, each 25% smaller than the last, to layer another American flag. This is important because it stands to show John's ideas behind how strongly we are pressured to be patriotic and vocal about our country. It is literally doing what the old JM Flags 1917 Uncle Sam's posters had done, but with a more modern contemporary design.
Leaving behind the connections made between contemporary art forms and their historical and political contexts, we can begin to delve further back. Assessing the advent of pop art in London and America in the 50s and 60s, we can begin to see how art forms are able to address and form relationships with both commercial and social aspects. Pop art came about as a response to abstract expressionism, choosing to steer away from the art world's highbrow culture. It can be seen as an attempt to make art accessible and understandable to the general populace, and focuses heavily on the consumerism and commercialism that the world was experiencing in the decades following World War II. Roy Lichtenstein's work Wham! Can be seen to demonstrate these qualities. Like many pop art pieces of the time, the work borrows visual forms from comic book culture. Lichtenstein used this visual style to create a paradoxical painting in which the highly emotional subject matter is contrasted with the commercialized painting style which he employs.
A turning point into what would better be known as the now contemporary art era occurred in the year 1989 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Although our argument goes against the prospects of a definitive year beginning the era of contemporary modern art, it would otherwise be wrong to exclude the fact when talking about the photograph by Melanie Friend of the Saatchi & Saatchi First Over the Berlin Wall advertisement. The photograph depicted a clear banner of the Saatchi & Saatchi advertising agency, with 2 guards patrolling the wall above. The emergence of a new form of consumer art within a globalized context had begun with the use of events as advertising. The idea of art and commercialism merging into one had already been covered within the late postmodern period. What was once a political statement or an ironic poking of fun at advertising now became serious and within the Saatchi & Saatchi context, in many ways disrespectful. Melanie Friend's statement when publishing her picture was even captioned, "Gone are the political slogans, prepare for the commercial ones."
Not only are artworks, themes and styles able to reflect their contextual backgrounds, they are also able to evolve in terms of pure form based on the technological advancements that surround them. As technology is developed to perform a specific purpose or task, it is able to be quickly adapted and utilized within the art world to achieve a different meaning. Jeff Krause's work Invisible Threads is a good example of technology being reused for the purposes of artistic exploration. Within the work, Krause utilizes a virtual game world in order to employ avatars to work in his digital sweatshop, with each avatar being controlled by a real individual on their own computer. Through this process, the workers would enable a real pair of jeans to be manufactured. This bizarre exploration between the contrasting virtual labour and the real-world implications created a very interesting narrative for the viewer. It's important to note that Krause's contemporary work would have been impossible to achieve 10 or 20 years earlier. The technology simply didn't exist to be repurposed in such a way. This idea that the advancement of the technology directly impacts on the contemporary art world is not an emerging trend, but instead has been an unavoidable reality over the centuries.
Ah, you're back. I'm glad you made it through the video. As you can see, contemporary artwork very much so accounts for that which is taking place, and is influenced by both personal and global events. Using artworks that display political, historical, technological and commercial contexts in different given times has allowed us to convey the impacts of contemporary artworks, as well as give insight into the concepts and ideas that influence the artists. Well, it seems my time is up, and I have finished my scotch. Till next time, my friends.